Welcome everyone to the 2021 Albany Fall Conference. It's another year that we're online for our conference. In the past, we've had conferences at Fordham Law School, but we still welcome everybody and thank you for joining us this year. My name is Beatrice Leong. I'm the moderator tonight. I am the membership director of Albany and also the board liaison for the Pro Bono and Public Service Committee. Tonight, we're gonna talk about pro bono crisis lawyering, the challenges and lessons learned during this past year. I'm going to do a quick introduction of our speakers, and you can get their full bios at the end of this PowerPoint. So our first speaker is Carolyn. She's a co-chair of the Albany Pro Bono and Community Service Committee. She is a court attorney referee with Kings County Surrogates Court, and she's been part of the court system since 1999. Next is Kwok K. He's a co-chair of Albany's Pro Bono and Community Service Committee and the secretary of the LIRS of Albany, which you'll hear more about. During the day, he's an assistant law clerk to Honorable Carolyn Wade in Kings County Supreme Court. Next is Eugene Love Kim. He is a vice chair of Albany's Pro Bono and Community Service Committee. And he is, during the regular day, he works as a public defender at the Legal Aid Society. And lastly, Nicholas Lowe, he is a pro bono director of the Student Outreach Committee of Albany. And he's currently a 3L at Fordham Law School and a former vice president of Fordham Apalsa. So I'm gonna read you guys some information. The Asian American Bar Association of New York is certified by New York State Continuing Legal Education Board as an accredited provider. This program has been approved in accordance with the requirements of CLE board for a maximum of 1.5 credit hours, in which 1.5 credit hours will be applied to the skills requirement. This program is suitable for both transitional and non-transitional New York attorneys. You have to be pre-registered and confirmed to receive the CLE credit. I'm going to be reading codes throughout this program, so pay attention and don't sign off and run away during the middle of the program because you need to get these codes in order to get your CLE credits. So next, we're going to start our presentation. But before that, a lot of our speakers work for the court system in New York State. Their opinions are their own, and they don't represent the opinions of Albany or their employers. Okay. So I'm going to do a quick introduction. This program is going to examine how members of Albany, consisting of lawyers and volunteers, united for justice and equity during this time of crisis. So as you know, during the COVID-19 pandemic, not only did the Asian community face a lot of poverty because of work stoppage, there was also a lot of anti-Asian hate. So this program we're going to tell you about what the Pro Bono Clinic did and offered to help indigent individuals, people with limited English proficiency, and Asian Americans in New York City, actually throughout the country as well. So let's start the program. Okay. Karen, do you want to talk about the Pro Bono and Community Service Committee?
Sure. Thank you very much, Beatrice. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel today. So our committee is one of the many in Albany that focuses on taking the willingness and the time and the generosity and the skills of attorneys who are interested in giving back to the community and matching it with the needs of the Asian Pacific American community as it becomes apparent to us. So during COVID-19, in March of 2020, when there was a statewide shutdown of really the schools, the courts, and really most major industries, it became very clear to us on the committee that there was a need for information to be available to the public, since at that time, if you recall, in the area of immigration, there were travel bans that were being issued that would change and affect a person's ability to travel, as well as immigration issues that would impact many individuals in our communities that needed to be disseminated and available. There were eviction issues and moratoriums that were being passed down on the state and the federal level. That information needed to be disseminated in the area of, at that time, there were not yet, but there would later on be tragically a high number of deaths in our state and particularly in our city, so that there are families who needed information on what to do once a loved one died, how to get a death certificate, what to do about accessing their loved one's safety deposit boxes. So, and part of the problem, what's layered on top of this lack of access to information, because government agencies had shut down and offices had shut down, was the challenges and barriers due to somebody who has limited English proficiency, which is very much a large community that we serve in Albany through the Pro Bono Community Services Committee. So within a month of the statewide shutdown, the volunteers through Albany, through the committee, and with the help of Simpson Thatcher, compiled really a resource hub of information having to do with COVID-19 related issues, such as where to get testing, what are the latest immigration policies that are pertinent, how does a person access court operations, particularly if a person had an appearance date in court, or if they needed access to the help center and they could no longer go in person, how could they access this information? We also provided in this hub information about where to obtain free meals for individuals who need it, for individuals who needed unemployment insurance, how to apply for that, where to go, what were tenants and landlords' rights in the area of housing during this time, as well as resources that would assist in the areas of domestic violence, family law, as well as access to New York City agencies. So much of what we did, what we were concerned about, was access to information that would be critical to a community member's day-to-day existence during this pandemic. So what we found, and as you can see, it is posted on the Bar Association website. What we then found was that having this information on the website was not enough. We needed to explain what some of the issues that were impacting the community was in a way that was more dynamic. So we organized community presentations on several topics, including housing, including anti-Asian violence, which Eugene Kim will speak more about later, and on family law. We also provided trainings because many of our volunteer attorneys did not necessarily understand what the law was in this particular area. And in order for us to help others in a competent fashion, we needed to first learn the information ourselves in order to be able to assist others. And so community presentations through this wonderful vehicle of Zoom was utilized. And following those community presentations, we then further realized that the information is good, but it's only a starting point, that people in the community very much needed one-on-one time with volunteer attorneys in order to get the questions to their specific issues answered. And so before the pandemic, we had very robust walk-in clinics where individuals from the Asian American community could come into our clinic sites in Brooklyn and in Manhattan and bring their questions. Now with the shutdown and the worldwide pandemic, we were no longer able to do so. So we created and implemented a remote legal clinic where community members could access a volunteer attorney through a telephone line that they would call. And we were able to assist, I believe the last count was 428 callers in English, in Cantonese and Mandarin, in Japanese, and in Korean. And that all those efforts were really to, as a response to the crisis of the pandemic and the lack of access that it brought on.
Karen?
Yes, I believe that I've concluded that portion. I don't want to hog up the whole time, so I think I've concluded
Yeah.
my part.
Just to give a little bit of a history, prior to the remote clinic where people could call in to get legal advice, the Albany Pro Bono Committee has been in existence since 2015, and they would have in-person pro bono clinics. So as you can see, and as Karen has explained, they managed to work with the the restrictions of the city and open a remote legal clinic. So Eugene, do you want to talk about HEART program?
Sure. So the HEART initiative, which stands for Hate Eradication Active Response Team, it essentially came about due to the rise in anti-Asian violence that started during the pandemic. And as we've seen in the media and unfortunately in real life, an increase in anti-Asian sentiment and anti-Asian violence has indeed been an actual phenomenon. There were over 259 reports of anti-Asian incidents in New York City since the beginning of this year. There were over 3,000 reports nationally, and both of these figures are considerably lower due to underreporting, for various reasons, fear of retaliation, a lack of knowledge of the criminal system in America, distrustfulness in law enforcement, and of course, language barriers. And unfortunately, these attacks have not and are not going anywhere. Because our community was greatly impacted, Albany took to action in implementing many initiatives, one of which was HEART. Now, HEART was created to support community members who have suffered from an anti-Asian incident. And this is an illustrative list, but it's, harassment, discrimination, physical violence, or emotional trauma. And the purpose of the initiative is to essentially assist survivors in navigating this process, and by honoring their individual interest in resolving the occurrence that they find themselves in. Now, this can look different depending on the individual's desires. For instance, if the survivor wants to report the incident, we assist them, not through legal representation, but accompanying them to court with interviews, what have you, until a disposition is rendered on the matter. And I want to emphasize, though, that HEART is not like a pro-prosecution entity that seeks redress and justice under the law, but it's ultimately designed to obtain a resolution that the survivor desires. There tends to be like a common misconception that people have that survivors always want anti-Asian violence perpetrators to be prosecuted, but survivors are not always interested in prosecution. Instead, often they want to be completely removed from the situation because they often have to relive the trauma of the incident during like the duration of a criminal matter. So when the community member is not interested in reporting or prosecuting this incident, HEART, what we do is we continue to assist that individual in getting the help and support that they need. Now, this can be achieved in a variety of ways. Again, non-exhaustive list here, but we help by helping these community members seek counseling services, resources, mental health treatment resources, or connecting them with other survivors. And Heart's engagement with the community member ends when they decide no further assistance is required. And basically the Heart, it consists of a team of volunteers, both attorneys and interpreters that assist our community members. We encourage anyone that's interested in reaching out to us. You can email us at probono@albany.org. And we're always seeking volunteers that want to help out, that want to be involved and want to engage with the community.
Thank you, Eugene. Okay, next slide. Okay, Eugene, do you want to discuss this report that Albany was a big part of?
Sure, Beatrice. So this report entitled A Rising Tide of Hate and Violence Against Asian Americans in New York during COVID-19 Impact Causes Solutions. It was, I believe the main editors were one of the Pro Bono Committee's chair, Karen King, and one of Albany's board directors, Chris Kwok, and as well as other attorneys and volunteers, and in collaboration with the firm Paul Weiss. The report, goes into detail about the impact the pandemic has on our community. I think most of us are familiar with like the impact that it's had, and this is why we've done all these initiatives. That's why there's a lot of organizations coming to action to provide resources for communities, for community members, and there's been a lot of changes from some politicians, and you see things in media. But the report also discusses the causes that make our community a target of hate and violence. The report discusses at length the history of anti-Asian hate and violence and racism historically in the United States, when Asians first immigrated to the United States, as well as the media role, or the media and its role in inciting xenophobia and kind of stoking anti-Asian racism. And ultimately, the report proposes possible solutions consisting of, there's policy changes, there's calls for education reform, centralized reporting system, greater AAPI representation in law enforcement, public office, and the court system, civil actions, and building stronger connections with other communities of color. Now, I'm not sure if the PowerPoint is being distributed to all the viewers out there right now, but there is a link provided in the slide, or maybe not, maybe not anymore. But if you just do a web search,
there's a link on the top of the Albany webpage. So anyone who's interested and has not read it yet, it's listed there.
Yes, or you can Google Albany Rising Tide of Hate. It's the first thing that pops up.
Mm-hmm. And then,
yes. Now, I guess shifting gears a little bit. So, Carolyn, she just earlier discussed our pro bono clinic. Which has been virtual for a while, but recently we started back up in person. About the pro bono clinic, it's great. We have an amazing staff of attorneys, interpreters, and volunteers. But our clinic is entirely run on a volunteer basis. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't mention that as a committee, we don't particularly have deep pockets. Everything you've seen today so far, and I guess in the rest of the presentation, is a result of our love for our community and our labor, blood, sweat, and tears, and I guess countless Zoom meetings and emails. But since the pandemic, we've been raising funds by selling our One Humanity Against the Virus buttons. It was designed by an Albany member, Joanne Wong. Please feel free to grab one, or two, or three, or four, however many you desire. It means a lot to us, and it would really help us out. And you can find them on the Albany website.
Okay, next we're going to have Nicholas Lowe Nick, can you tell the audience what the Student Outreach Committee did during this pandemic?
I'd be happy to. Thanks. And it's a pleasure to be here, and particularly to be sharing the Zoom stage with you all. So as Beatrice mentioned, I'm the pro bono director of the Student Outreach Committee. The Student Outreach Committee helps engage APOSA students across the state, and I have the particular opportunity to engage with students who are interested in volunteering. And so to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the work that happened over the last year and a half, in July of 2020, we had sort of our first kickoff flyering campaign where we went into certain Asian American, Asian Pacific Islander communities around the city and handed out flyers to share Know Your Rights information and contact information for the Pro Bono Community Services Committee and their remote clinic. That initial flyering event went off really well. We engaged with community members and talked about the services of AABANY, what legal services were available, and how they could make those connections. And then also in July of 2020, we had a rent relief clinic, and we collaborated with the Pro Bono Community Services Committee and the attorneys. And on that committee, we had 25 volunteers, 100 walk-in applications, and over 100, about 125 voicemails and online submissions to the clinic. This was the when the New York State Homes and Community Renewal COVID rent relief extension program opened up. That was that application drive. And then there was sort of so much interest and pickup that when the New York State program reopened in February of 2021, we had a Rent Relief Clinic 2.0. That one we handled over the phone, and we fielded over 80 phone calls over the course of, I think, 2 weeks. And we connected them with volunteer attorneys and volunteer law students who could help them with language access skills and sort of walking them through some aspects of what kinds of documentation they would need to apply. And then most recently, just a few months ago, we had our Flyering Event 2.0. We included some information about HEART, about the Legal Referral Information Service, PBCS's clinic, and we handed out over 1,000 flyers across a couple boroughs here in New York, and just provided an opportunity. It was a win-win. We had a lot of law students who were eager to get involved, given this COVID moment, this wave of anti-Asian violence. We had a lot of Asian American, Asian Pacific Islander law students who were excited about hitting the streets, talking to people, and also we got to connect community members with really important services. And so through both of those pop-up sort of addressing the rent relief programs and the flyering opportunities, we were really able to engage both students, volunteer attorneys, and community members.
Thanks so much, Nick. At this time, I'm going to read out the first code that you need for your CLE. So get your pencils ready. The first code is Steward 4351. I'm going to spell that out. STEWARD 4351. Again, that's Steward 4351. Okay. Okay. There's some pictures. Nick, do you want to describe?
Sure. Sorry, I forgot these were in the PowerPoint. So the previous slide was sort of a shot of the rent relief clinic that I was just describing, and then those photos were our team in Koreatown, Chinatown, Manhattan, and Brooklyn, Chinatown, both from last year and this most recent flyering adventure.
Thank you. And then can you tell the group a little bit about these flyers?
These were the flyers that we provided people, and you can see sort of the substantive legal areas that we told folks the clinic would be able to help people with. And we had both sort of the QR code and the phone number, recognizing that not everyone in the community was had a smartphone and could read that QR code, but also because of COVID, we didn't necessarily think that people would want to be touching flyers and hand. So there were sort of a bunch of different considerations that went into the design of this flyer. The design was the collective input of a lot of different committee members because it was co-sponsored by a number of different groups. But it was particularly designed. The most recent one, the one you see on the left, was designed by Charlene Hong, who's one of the co-chairs of the Student Outreach Committee and an APALSA member from Cornell.
Great. Okay, next we're going to talk about the legal referral and information services. Kwok?
Yes, thank you, Beatrice. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about briefly about the background of LIS, its creation and its mission. In the context of providing legal representation and addressing legal needs, most underserved segments of the population in the U.S. Are Asian Americans. There are about 230 legal referral services operated by bar associations in the U.S., but less than 10 of them identify as having any capability to address the legal issues in any Asian languages. In most cases, it simply means that the legal referral service may have an isolated attorney on its panel who can speak in a particular Asian language. But in New York City, almost 14% of its population is Asian Americans, and many of them are not English speakers. In an effort to fill this underrepresented population, Albany, in late 2020, introduced its legal referral and information service. Also, you can see on the screen, also known by its initials as LRIS. Its mission is to help the Asian American population in New York by referring them to experienced, vetted, insured, and in many cases, language-capable lawyers who they can confidently hire and get legal advice from. Since its opening, LIS has received about 1,000 calls that deal with full spectrum of causes of action. Many calls have dealt with motor vehicle accidents, for example, personal injuries, landlord tenants, real property issues, immigration, discrimination, family law, and identity theft. Recently, we also see a spike in ADA cases against Chinatown businesses brought by a cluster of plaintiffs' lawyers. To address this, LIS has coordinated with New York's Chinatown Business Improvement District, known as Chinatown BID, and is in the process of providing lawyer-sponsored presentations to the Chinatown business community to prepare for this type of cases. Additionally, during the pandemic, LIS has received a number of calls in connection with unprovoked assault against Asian Americans, frequently arising as a result of ascribed blame for the pandemic. LIS, through its several language-dedicated phone lines, acts as a conduit to funnel those calls to other Albany programs, such as Heart to Heart Initiative that we've heard about, and also PPCS Monthly Clinic. LIS has dedicated significant resources to promote his program and the lawyers on his panels. Search engine promotion has resulted in impressions on search screens, visits to the LIS website, and the calls it has received. We welcome every lawyer who is dedicated to helping the Asian American community to apply for membership on the panel. For those who are interested in joining, you can find more information in an application at legalreferral.albany.org. You can see the website on the PPT right now. And this is the flyer we've been giving out at our legal clinic. For those clients that in the clinic that we see before LIS, we didn't have an established system to refer those cases, and now we do. And to the extent that the client in the clinic needs a lawyer to represent them in a court, for example, and that he or she is not otherwise qualified for free legal services provided by other free legal service providers, we will then refer them to the LIS, and vice versa.
Okay, thank you, Kwok. So let's see. Here we wanted to recognize the former chairs of pro bono and community service. The very first chair was Sam Liu and June Lee, who created the in-person pro bono clinics that, you know, when they started in 2015, there were about 2 lawyers and a couple of clients coming in, but right before the pandemic, we had almost over 50 volunteer lawyers and, you know, about 50 or more clients every single month coming in to get advice. So this was a great community service that Albany has provided. And then for the volunteers in the crowd, thank you so much. There's translators, student attorneys, student translators, and lawyers of all different backgrounds that came to the clinics. If you have any questions, contact pro bono at albany.org or volunteer to come to one of the upcoming pro bono clinics. You can find all of this at probono.albany.org. And right now I'm going to end this PowerPoint, and we're going to get into the question and answering, not the question and answering, my questions to the panel, and then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end for everyone who has questions for the panel. Everyone who has questions, I encourage you to type your questions in the chat box so that we can read some questions at the end. So my first question for the panel, this is for all the lawyers here, the people who are licensed. What is your definition of crisis lawyering? So that's like a new hot lingo. What is crisis lawyering?
I think Eugene, you should take this one.
You know, I guess, yeah, crisis lawyering is become more of a popular term since the pandemic, at least in the legal field. I guess maybe I have a different definition or a different idea of crisis lawyering because, you know, I think that anytime, you know, there's lawyers, there's like some sort of conflict that can't be resolved. So I guess in some ways, you know, every attorney is dealing with or handling some crisis, but I guess more specifically to like the crisis lawyering that we're thinking about now, you know, it just really means, you know, being there and being able to advocate for your client in a time of urgency. I would say it's been, you know, more of a, it's been more more important, I guess, now since we see since we've seen more I guess inequities going on since the pandemic, especially within our community, for us to kind of take the reins and do what we can for the people.
Karen?
Yeah.
Karen, did you want to go next?
I was going to build on to what Eugene so aptly expressed. You know, I think our clients are almost always in crisis, right? They have gotten a marshal's notice and they're about to be evicted from their home, or they've gotten a summons and they have to appear in criminal court, or they have received a deportation notice, right? So they are always in crisis. I think when I hear the term crisis lawyering, I think about, you know, how to use the law effectively to help people during times of great challenge and need. But I also think about, you know, the crisis part is not just applying to the client, it's also applying to the lawyer. So when I think about crisis lawyering in the age of this pandemic, I think about the disruptions and that have been ongoing in the lives of the attorneys. And that includes, you know, workplace disruption in the most like often used word in 2020, unprecedented, right? In unprecedented ways, where our personal space and our workspace has disappeared. And we are, you know, working in our bedrooms, in our basements. And I think some people in their bathrooms have become sort of makeshift meeting space. But the attorney in crisis is also, these are uncharted times of how to work in a different space and to balance personal and professional, but also how to access your client who in the past would have come into your office. You can see them, you can have that close proximity that, you know, really aids in being able to ascertain what a person's needs are. And now you cannot because of these restrictions. Also access to the courts. How do you file your papers? Access to governmental agencies if you are applying for services and benefits for your client. How do you navigate those items? And, you know, and this is all in the context of, you know, we're very deadline driven people because there are bad consequences that happen when you miss a deadline. There are effects, you know, they're blowing a statute of limitations is grounds for malpractice. So navigating these challenges, and, you know, some of us are very tech savvy, but there are a lot of attorneys that are very not tech savvy. I have attorneys on conferences that pull out their legal pad and their pen, and I'm one of them. But being able to figure out, you know, how to Zoom and how not to get Zoom bombed and how to make the sound and all that work. I think, you know, how to practice law competently, effectively, without kind of losing your mind is part of the challenge of crisis lawyering.
I'll piggy on what Eugene and Karen said is that, and I'll use a great example. In the past year, we have a pandemic and we didn't have the in-person clinic. Whereas back in the time, folks in the community knew that we have a clinic once every month on the second week of second Saturday, for example. So folks know that where to go, but since the pandemic, we stopped the in-person clinic, and people did not know. We experienced some difficulties to reach out to the community and let them know that we're available. But still, a lot of folks either do not have access to, as Karen said, Zoom. They don't know how to scan the code. So we do see a great difficulty since the pandemic, and I think this plays a great role in crisis lawyering. And also, as Karen said, access to the courts. A lot of them don't speak English, and for those who have questions about access to justice, they wouldn't otherwise know how to get, for example, an interpreter to help them navigate the court system. So that is something that that should be reflected on, especially after this pandemic.
So this question is for all panelists. How has the pandemic changed the way your employer or school run during the pandemic from how it used to be from before? Do you notice any different significant changes that has affected the way you practice as a lawyer or attend school?
Nick, you want to take this one?
I can jump in. So I think that clients are both more reachable and less reachable because of the pandemic, right? Zoom has illustrated a greater ease in having conversations with some people who have access to internet and a quiet space, right? But for other people that's harder. And so I think that in these particular times, I have seen the volunteer opportunities that I've been involved with both be excited about these opportunities that, like, oh, you know, these clients who like had to commute and like we had to reimburse them for MetroCard, right? Like that, we have a different option now. But in some ways, I think that the ease with which lawyers have made sort of a transition into doing client interviewing over Zoom and negotiating sort of the confidentiality aspects of that has not necessarily translated in the same way in terms of low-income folks, right? Low-income folks, people of color, the access to these kinds of technologies are different, and just like many things in our society, sort of disproportionately fall on marginalized folks. So I think that's where I'll start.
How about on the government side? What changes did the court system have to implement as a result of the pandemic?
So in Kings County, where I am, the courts never fully closed. What did happen was that we all went to work on a remote basis. And so all of the court conferences that were held were using Microsoft Teams, and all of the files that we looked at to write draft decisions and to work on motion decisions were all done through the computer. And again, the courts, I think it sort of forced it to come into modern technology like very, very quickly, and weaned us off of our dependence on paper. So like, to agree with what Nick said, it had good parts and it had not so good parts. One of the parts of it that was actually very beneficial was that it cut down on for the attorneys that were appearing in court, many of whom didn't necessarily live in the borough. It cut down for them their commute time of 3 hours, 4 hours, looking for parking, waiting in the courtroom for a 15-minute conference. And so it was very beneficial in that the attorneys could sign on very quickly, and it led actually to a great many settlements of the conferences. I had actually thought that if you didn't have everybody in the room, perhaps that would make people more fixed in their position and less willing to move. But it was actually quite the opposite. And the downside was that it was very isolated. One of the nice things about working in the courthouse is that there are always lots of people around. You have colleagues that you see, you have folks in the clerk's department that you talk with, and you get a sense of what's happening in cases that don't have to do with yours necessarily, but you get a better sort of pulse of what's happening.
I second what Carolyn just said. We work right across the building, and she has covered, Carolyn has in detail covered many of the new procedures adopted by the court system. And I'll also add that the state also implements new changes, major changes to the uniform rules for the Supreme and County courts. And it basically adopts many of the existing rules and procedures of the commercial division of the New York Supreme Court, and also to make appearances a little bit more easier. So the New York court system has really worked hard and quick to adopt the situation that we're in. And they also implemented different devices to ensure that while it's not closed, that we can continue to work remotely and in the beginning, and also that we are now able to resume jury trials, for example. So things are slowly getting back to normal in that regard due to the collective effort by all employees.
I do just have to add, for the city courts, the courts with the largest dockets and the highest volumes, such as housing court and family court, there are ongoing challenges with respect to safety, with respect to calendaring and how to use the existing space, which is already overcrowded before the pandemic, and how to have in-person appearances again. And those are arguably amongst the most vulnerable in the population.
Do you believe that there is going to be some element of keeping courts virtual even after Delta is gone and after there are vaccines and, the pandemic goes away?
I think the element of virtual, that's here to stay. I believe there's some element of virtual that's going to be here to stay, whether that entails the attorney conferences or hearings. I did a hearing 2 days ago with litigants in Finland. And so, the remote aspect of it was very helpful. And we're so much better at it now because we've been doing it for 1.5 years. So I think there's some component of that will stay. But there's issues of access. If you don't have great broadband, if you don't have great, is that the right word? If you don't have great connectivity, people drop out, and it's, that, and not everyone has access to a good computer or a laptop or has that, internet connection. So, it's a balance.
Yeah, even though a lot of cases now are e-filed, and of course they encourage e-filing, a lot of non-e-file cases now has been converted to e-file. There are still some cases that are simply non-e-file, and then it's still difficult for the attorneys and the court to access those files. Yes, as currently said, now I think virtual is here to stay, at least some portion of it. And now I think for the past 2 years, attorneys now have become familiar with, using Teams or Skype for businesses. I mean, they've been doing it for 2 years, so I don't think they will just waste their effort in the past 2 years to learn. And I still remember at the beginning, we have a tremendous difficulty connecting to attorneys on Teams, but it doesn't seem to be an issue anymore.
Okay, so I have a next question. Again, this is for all panelists. We are all involved in AABANY, but many of us are also involved in other groups, other organizations, other clubs. Have you guys noticed how other organizations adjusted their practices during this pandemic? It could be pro bono related or any other organizations that you guys are involved with. Have you guys noticed any shifts in the way those organizations handle their normal day-to-day activities?
Yeah, so I guess I can speak on that a little bit. So I'm not really sure about some of the organizations like basically day-to-day activities, but what I can say with certainty that is, because we've become so reliant on doing everything virtually, electronically because of the pandemic. I think a lot of organizations have done a good job, promoting or doing things with social media. I think a lot of organizations have found a way to connect with a lot of people, like let's say communities, people that would receive benefits or resources. And you see this across not even just I guess organizations like bar associations or anything, but I think just everyone's kind of gravitating towards social media. And I think that the ones that haven't been adapting to it as well have been struggling.
Okay. So all of you spoke about what your committee, what the pro bono committee did during this pandemic. What was one particular incident or client that you helped that affected you or that is the most memorable for you from this whole pro bono year?
I'll speak first. First, I actually don't have a client per se, but I do recall that in one of the anti-Asian violence presentations that we did at the beginning of the last year, I believe, we did one in Mandarin, we did one in Korean, and we did one in Cantonese in addition to English. And we were able to, at the time, have an officer who spoke Cantonese and Mandarin to present at one of our presentations. And it was very comforting and actually very a great addition to the panel, because he was able to give actual practical advice as to what we should do when we witness or when we encounter and biased incidents. And there was, and I remember there was a person in the audience who was asking about what he should do, whether he was allowed to carry a pepper spray, and to hear that, and coming from an officer to tell them what they can do, what they should not do, and how they can help decrease and report the incident, I think was to them very helpful, because a lot of them don't know what they should do, or they think that there's nothing they can do when they see a biased incident. So I think for the community, that particular presentation was very helpful.
I'd like to talk about one of the situations that we were helpful with very early on in the pandemic. And, you know, we, on the pro bono committee, especially in the clinics, or even when we do assistance, we're always very clear to let individuals know that we are not providing them with legal representation or legal advice. We are not, they're not retaining us to be their attorneys. What we are doing is providing information about the legal process. So we just always make that clear, so that we manage expectations, and so that all of us don't run afoul of our kind of day job restrictions. So anyway, I believe it was March 16th, 2 or 3 days after the state shut down, the pro bono committee was contacted by a group of residents at this sort of dormitory setting called International House in Upper Manhattan. And it houses about 300 plus graduate students who attend various higher institutions, such as Columbia, the Rockefeller Center, and they come from all over the world to do these studies. And there was one incident of COVID-19 testing of a staff member that was positive. And then subsequently there was a resident who died of COVID-19. And all of the residents there were given 8 days to move out. Almost all of them did not have families in New York. They had, and with the travel ban due to COVID, they couldn't go back to their countries. They had very limited resources. Many of them were staying at an international house based on scholarships and grants. And not only were they given 8 days to vacate the premises, there, from what we were told, there was no testing that was being done. There were no safety protocols. There was no disinfection measures. There was no sanitation measures to keep the residents safe. And so in essence, this 8-day vacate policy would have rendered them out on the streets of New York City, perhaps with COVID, without COVID, but certainly without any remedy. So the matter came to us, and this was, normally this would be a time where we could, we would, perhaps meet with the students, meet with attorneys who have expertise in this area and are able to volunteer their time. But since it was not safe for anyone to meet face to face, we had to meet with the students during Zoom, very late night Zoom meetings. And the students were the eyes and ears of the committee to say, we're walking around, we're trying to figure out how many people are still left in the building and what notices have been put up, and they would take pictures with their phone and send them or screenshots. And we we had the assistance of a very experienced housing attorney from Northern Manhattan Legal Services, who was on our team to try to just the students wanted to know what their rights were, whether this was legal, whether this was not legal, and what information could we give them, what were next steps. And it's one of those examples to me of like crisis lawyering, in that one of, I think, the skills that I might take away from this time is that, you know, there is very much a need to be flexible and to be creative. That sometimes there are issues that a legal solution can't solve. And even though we wear the hat of a lawyer and we go through training as a lawyer, and perhaps we just kind of think in that narrow way, especially in times of just like uncharted waters, we need to expand our understanding of how we can assist with the skills that we have. And so what our team was able to do was to let the students know, you know, which elected officials they could get in touch with so that there would be more public attention to this matter. We gave information about which media outlets that they could contact so that they could tell their story directly. And we also were able to get in touch with the governor's office and the New York City Commission on Human Rights and the New York State Health Department. And so really this multi-pronged approach that had really nothing to do with what we learned in law school, but that was all brought to bear on this particular crisis that the students were going through. And Albany was extremely fast acting and supportive, and also sending a letter to the president of International House to bring attention to this issue. So that's my one case I was going to highlight.
Yeah, so were the students ultimately kicked out of the campus, or were they allowed to stay?
So there were two buildings, and the original, from our understanding, the original plan was to vacate both the buildings. And so the entity that's in charge did not require both buildings to vacate. And the one that was required to vacate, the International House provided some funding. There was also a GoFundMe efforts through the Alumni Association that also helped. And then the time in which it took them to have to leave was able to be extended so that nobody was left out on the street. We also tried to speak with governmental authorities about providing temporary housing, perhaps through some of the state campuses, state university campuses, as part of the efforts. And it bought enough time for everyone to be able to get to where they needed to go safely. One thing that was kind of interesting too was, you know, and this is what's so, I think, amazing about an organization like Albany that has so many members with a diverse array of specialties is, you know, this was ostensibly a housing issue, but since some of the residents also received scholarships through International House, they had a fear of, if they spoke out and complained, that there would be retaliation against them. And so it was very helpful to have employment and labor and civil rights lawyers on our committee, and in Albany who were able to give information about what were some of the remedies if that should happen.
I have a thought about not a specific client either, but sort of an example from the past year. Karen, you were talking about flexibility and being able to pivot in the moment, and that rent relief 1.0, when New York State released this program, I thought it was a really, you know, unfortunately good, in quotes, example of sort of how new programs can allow certain populations to fall through the cracks. So, you know, we had a lot of people come through that clinic who did not have a traditional landlord-tenant relationship, right? They weren't coming in because they were the only tenants with their family. They had a direct lease with one landlord, right? They were often people who lived with multiple people who were also working in other areas of the city, and they didn't really know who they were. And they didn't know if the person that they gave their money to was actually the landlord, the person who owned the property, or actually a sublease, right? And they were sort of a third iteration of subleasing for the apartments. And so I remember one of the considerations when we were organizing that rent relief clinic 1.0 was getting an attorney to do a training and talk us through, like, we needed the supervision to make sure that we, you know, had some advice, but this was all new, right? And this was all new, and there wasn't an answer per se, right? Because it was just a new program with new eligibility, and we were having to kind of think through these problems with an application that was not meant to support people who live in sort of these untraditional kinds of apartment situations. And so I think that's really sort of an example of how you think about the professional responsibility aspect. You think of the supervision, you provide the training for the volunteers, but then it's about judgment. It's about exercising judgment for people on the margins who are not easily put into these boxes of, oh, you're a tenant, you deserve, right? And, you know, I remember someone came in with their landlord, and it was, it was unclear in the moment. We thought maybe they were living together, that they were in a relationship, right? Like, it was, these kinds of things are just, in the moment, you have to be flexible. You have to be ready to exercise that kind of judgment in a professional way. So that's one of the things that sticks out in my mind from the past year.
Okay. So that's this is a good time to talk about programming, actually. So you talked a little bit, the speakers talked a little bit about the rent relief, which is the government program, right? Everybody knows about, the small business loans, the PPP loans. What other programs do you guys personally think that either the government or another organization should create that is still missing, that is still needed for these underserved communities?
I can go very quick and then pass it off to people who know more than me. I think the New York State Excluded Workers Fund is a great example of how directly impacted individuals can create advocacy opportunities to do a program that actually works. And as I understand, last week, the $2.1 billion ran out, and there's sort of a question about whether or not there's the ability to sort of move that along. And in my mind, that's something that still is incredibly important.
To sort of answer it in a different way, Beatrice, I think that the programs that currently exist, like the rent assistance relief, the ERAP program, and then there is a new landlord's rent assistance program for landlords who have tenants who didn't apply for the ERAP program. There's still so many barriers for individuals to apply for these things. It's incredibly cumbersome. During our last Saturday clinic, we had volunteer assistant completing the application, and each application takes a good over an hour to fill out. And so and you layer on top of it, again, this the limited English proficiency population. It makes the programs are good. The implementations need to take into consideration, how can we get this to the populations that may not readily access it? The rent relief program, the RRP program that Nick, sorry to call you Nicholas, was referring to, the window period for applying, I think, was dismally small. I think it was a 2-week window program where, you had to apply between these 14 days. And there were, lots of questions about eligibility, which the rent relief program, the volunteers were incredibly adept at being able to answer questions about screening. But there were so many eligibility questions. By the time some people heard about it, it was the last day. It was a mad scramble to apply for it. And then my understanding is that it opened up later on. But some of these things about how is it going to be rolled out in a way that you want to maximize participation by communities that need it most. How do you do that? Like, to think that through, so that when it's rolled out, there isn't, you're not already behind the 8 ball because English isn't your first language, or because you don't know a lawyer, or you don't know where to begin with these programs.
I agree what Karen said is, to me, in my experience, is what is needed not only in addition to programs that have been rolled out, but also language access, and just like the court system access to justice. A lot of folks, as Karen said, a lot of folks don't know that, largely because of language barrier, that they don't know that the program exists. And when they know it, it'll be too late, or they know about the program, but they don't know how to apply, because the information is just simply not available to them in their language. So that is something that AABANY is trying to do, and that should be something that government agencies should strive to do also, is to ensure to have a proper channel to communicate to the community's members, so that they are aware of the programs that they're offering and help them through the process.
Okay, so this is a good time to segue to the next question that I have for everyone on the panel. What do you personally believe that needs to be achieved to ensure that the communities on the brink are able to receive these resources? Like, what are the next action steps that you believe personally that anyone can do to help these communities on the brink?
I can start. To the extent that you speak another language, or that you people who speak another language, then ask them to volunteer. For example, our clinics, our different programs, they will help the folks who need help, and I think that would be a good start, because again, a lot of people just don't know that there are helps out there, and we need a lot of volunteers to make the community aware of this assistance.
We are amongst a group of attorneys in the crowd. What can an attorney who has not provided pro bono services do to contribute to the active efforts, like the HEART program, anti-Asian violence, or any of the other programs you guys have discussed? What can a lawyer do to help?
I think I have an answer for this. Like, this is something that I've heard in law school. And I think there's 2 ways to really contribute. One is to, actually get involved, do work. And the other way is like money, donations, anything. Because I know not everyone has like the capacity to help out for whatever reason, but that, financial help is a big help to, help communities, help organizations, help people, because a lot of these things, a lot of organizations doing good work, they don't have funding. Like HEART, or what we do with the pro bono clinic, it's all run by us. It's just volunteer work. So I think those are 2 options without getting too specific.
Yes, they can join, for example, yes, as Eugene said, they can join, they can help us at the monthly clinic. They can sign up for the HEART initiative to become one of the volunteers who are not really acting as an attorney, but help them navigate through the system to, for example, report to, for example, New York City Commission of Human Rights, to help them report to the police, things of that nature. They don't necessarily need to act as a legal counsel, which they were not. But it will be a great help for the person in need. And also they can also sign up for the LIS panel. I think those are in Albany the most main ways to help. Karen?
Right, just to tag on to all the good points that are made. If you are an attorney who and you don't practice in any of these areas that seem to be the most prevalent areas of need. There's a lot of questions about immigration and about housing and about domestic violence. Not that much about domestic violence. There's some about family law issues. But this past Saturday, I had several questions about powers of attorney. If you want to help, want to give the time, and you feel that you're not qualified, one of the best ways to learn is to come to the in-person clinic, especially since now we have it, and shadow somebody who is experienced in these areas. We had a legal services attorney who was very knowledgeable in housing this past Saturday, who was wonderful, and we were able to, I believe, pair him with some attorneys or law students so that they could learn. There's nothing, CLEs are helpful, but there's nothing like seeing how a person interacts with a member of the public, and how they get, communicate in a way that can get their story, and disseminate information in a way that can be heard. That's invaluable. So we invite you to join us in that effort.
So this is another question. What can a non-lawyer do to help? So maybe somebody who's a paralegal, a law student, they're not licensed, they can't give advice, they can't, they haven't studied the law. What can a non-lawyer do to help the pro bono efforts?
Nick, do you want to talk about Student Outreach Committee's flying campaign?
Sure, absolutely. Being the only non-attorney on the panel. So the Student Outreach Committee is a lovely way if there are students in the audience to get involved in AABANY's efforts. You can also volunteer at the pro bono clinic. Intake is needed. There are some skills that you can begin practicing now: client interviewing skills, active listening skills. Those are all things that contribute and help to the effort, while not needing to give legal advice and representation in that regard. I think about mentorship as a particularly important aspect to this, of building relationships with other attorneys and learning from them in that way. But folks with language skills are so critical. There's always a need for translation, and it's two pieces. It's the language skills and the ability to connect with another human being, and those aren't the same. And engaging with someone on the margins who's sort of dealing with the intersections of multiple different issues can be a really difficult situation, right? In some ways, we can open our hearts and feel really compassionate, and that's not actually what they need, right? Because they're looking for legal help. In some ways, we can be too distant, and sort of learning to navigate those spaces is really difficult. And so bringing the language skills and having those, but then also developing those really strong client skills, I think is a great way for non-lawyers to just make the process human. I mean, right, people are coming to us because they are in crisis, or because they are dealing with sort of the worst moment of their lives. And even just being greeted at the door by someone who says, welcome, that can go a huge distance in making that person's experience of the clinic go good or bad. I've seen it, or someone comes in and they're really stressed, and as opposed to, coming at them being like, don't bring that energy, you can be like, hey, you look like you're hurting, right? That can, it can be incredibly impactful. And those are non-legal skills that will serve you well and help things just run really well.
Right. In addition, there's so much behind the scenes work to every clinic that is that is, put on. There's so much work behind every drive, behind every community presentation. We are always in need of individuals who can write. When we draft our press releases, we're in need of individuals who are really good with social media, because I'm really bad at it. And, especially since this is the way that the message gets out, if the community doesn't know that we have services to offer, then it all really falls on deaf ears, right? So if you are really good at making TikTok videos, and you can figure out, how to parlay that to get information about the things that we have to offer out, we could use you. If you are good at designing flyers, that would be enormously helpful, because that is what lets the public know that we are here and we are here to help them. As an example, the button that you saw, the one, Humanity Against the Virus, that was a painting that was done by an artist who happens to also be an awesome labor lawyer who's an AABANY member. But she designed that based on an idea that our committee had. Hey, why don't we have a visual symbol that perhaps people could wear on the streets of New York that would sort of symbolize I'm a safe space during the spate of anti-Asian incidents. And that is nothing she learned in law school. That is all like pure talent. So you just need to come with really just a heart to want to help, and we'll figure out how to put you to work.
Just to add on what Karen and Nick has said already, community outreach. I was trying to get Nick to talk about the flying campaign, in which there were student leaders in the student outreach committee who helped us actually go into the community and distribute flyers. One of the student leaders actually adopted a cat in process, and it was just, and without their efforts, the clinic simply wouldn't have been successful. So to the extent that you can extend help, I think it will be great. And as Karen Lynn said, we can always get something, find you some work to do.
So I guess we are about 15 minutes away from the end of the program. I don't see any questions, but I have, I guess, one more question for the panelists. What do you envision as the future of the Pro Bono Clinic of Albany, as well as the future of crisis lawyering, after these sort of darker times have ended? What do you picture for the future?
Is this when we can talk about our wish list?
Exactly.
I would love to see the Pro Bono Clinic exist as a independently funded entity. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but very much like in the model of the City Bar Association has a City Bar Justice Center, where there are permanent staffing. There is a consistent place there where there's administrative support, and there is also, there are resources that are available so that the public can, it's not, just every month, but it would be available every day. And there are actually in New York City, we're very blessed to have so many legal services organizations, but there are not a lot that are able to help somebody for whom English is, not their main or their most comfortable language. There is, and that will always be an impediment to justice, and if you don't have access. And I think, the Asian American Bar Association is really very uniquely poised in that way. We have members that are second generation, 1.5 generation, third, fourth generation, and even first generation, right? And we don't just leverage, some of us, don't necessarily speak any language but English, but there is there's a cultural competence that comes from being in an environment where you can put somebody at ease and start to, and where somebody, you can't help somebody if they're not giving you information, and they're not going to give you information if they don't feel like they can trust you. So I feel that there is a very real need, and that we in Albany are uniquely able to fill, and to be able to see, kind of a fully funded, permanent, full-time clinic would be, on my wish list.
I have a few things to say. I agree with Karen. I would really, I guess in the ideal world, I would like to see the pro bono clinic be like same thing, fully independent entity or fully funded entity where people can have access to services, legal services every day. But because as Karen mentioned, I can't think of any legal services that provide assistance to people who don't speak English, or I guess cater to specific communities like, the Asian API community. But I would say, I guess part of the other question, Beatrice, was like, what do I expect the future to be like in terms of like crisis lawyering? I think like with, the proliferation of technology and people being more, I guess, for better or worse, attached to like the internet and the phone, I think we have more, we have more things that we're exposed to, more data. And I think, especially after the pandemic, people have become more aware of, social issues, crises. And I think that goes beyond like what happened out of the pandemic. Like, for instance, like what's happening in Rikers Island right now. The jail is being just overcrowded. I think it was something in the New York Post yesterday. There's like 100 people in one cell. People can't sleep. So they have to take turns. People stand up while other people are sleeping on the floor. They have like plastic bags as blankets and pillows. And, that's just an overcrowding. And like, I guess an issue with the criminal system. But beyond that, like there's crises everywhere, not just the pandemic. There's like, issues with people finding where to live, like homelessness or substance abuse issues, mental health issues, immigration issues or consequences that, that a lot of people are facing every single day that, I guess that we are not aware of, or I guess not we, but, people who aren't in the field or who, don't keep up to date are aware of. And I think that, with people, and especially I feel like the younger generation, since they're more aware of these things, I am hopeful that, that I guess when there's eventually new lawyers or new people in office, that they will tackle these issues and are able to make some sort of change. But I guess that remains to be seen.
When I think of my wish list, when I was thinking about this panel, I was talking to some fellow students, and one of the threads that kept coming up with API colleagues of mine was this notion of how our profession values prestige and what kinds of jobs people want to step into, and the ways in which sort of histories of intergenerational trauma, legacies of immigration, our desires to make our family proud, and have careers that are meaningful, and that can support and provide for a family. I think that sometimes in this profession, that is in tension with stepping into jobs that serve low-income people and people of color. And I'd love conversations to be had about sort of what jobs are out there, what opportunities exist to serve others, to be in service of others. And, part of it for Karen and Eugene's wish list of the fully staffed pro bono clinic are really excellent legal services attorneys, right? Who understand these civil issues and practice it daily. So I'm excited about having those conversations, and I think AABANY could be a particularly exciting place to be having sort of those conversations with people who understand sort of what those pressures are and what it is like sort of growing up in these families and having these expectations. I'll let Kwok have the last word.
I don't have much to add. I second what Nick, Karen, and Eugene said. I guess one more wish I would add would be, this year we're fortunate enough and blessed to have Megan Gao as second D to the PPCS committee, who will join us tonight also. And it would be great if we would have a staff to help us do everything that Megan has been doing. Who's been doing a great job. That's it.
May I just, Beatrice, before, sorry, it's a little off topic, but it's sort of answering kind of a question before when you had said, if you're not a lawyer, what can you do to help? So if you've noticed all of our backgrounds, you probably already did know, are photographs of the late and great Corky Lee. And just an example of someone who took his talent and his skill to help the community always, to be the eyes and capture for the rest of us and for all of history what was happening in his backyard as well as across the country. So this is just our kind of homage to him in a small way. So we appreciate him and we miss him.
Yeah, we definitely will miss him. Corky Lee photographed all our galas, the annual dinner galas, where we did fundraise for the Pro Bono Clinic. So unfortunately, he did die earlier this year in January of COVID. One of the biggest blows to the Asian community, the Asian legal community. So I believe there's an art installment dedicated to him. If you guys look in Chinatown. So there's a big painting. I think one of our members, the ones who designed the buttons, Joanne Siang Wong, she painted a picture of him as well. There are a lot of participants here. Does anybody have any questions? If they do, please type it into the chat. And while you guys are getting your questions together, you'll have to complete your evaluations of the program. Can you guys hear me?
Now we can. We lost you for a minute.
Yeah. So if you, everyone needs to fill out their CLE evaluations in order to get your credits, and you'll be able to send the attorney affirmation to cle@abany.org. And once that is processed, somewhere down the line, you'll get an email with your CLE certificates. Those attendees who are attending the sessions live at King and Spalding will need to sign in and out, which I don't know if there's anybody here signing in and out. And at 5:45, there's going to be a reception starting. So, whoever's in Midtown at this moment, you guys are welcome to join. I don't see any Q&As. May, is there anything else you wanted to add? May is one of the co-chairs of the Pro Bono.
Thank you so much for being here as the panel. I hope that you guys enjoy the CLE. I really enjoyed it. I think everyone has great opinions and statements to make. We do hope to see you all at our next Pro Bono clinic. That is all. Have a good night. Everyone get a drink.
Beatrice, I just want to add something. I think Karen, May, Eugene, and Nick and I would like to recognize those on the PPCS team who are going to join us tonight. Their co-chair, Judy Lee, who's been doing all the legwork for the committee for years. Co-chair, Karen King, who co-drafted, as you introduced, the profound and significant report on anti-Asian violence. Vice Chair, Olympia Moy, who has been helping us connect us to the community. And also May Wong, who literally does everything.
So another thing I wanted to add is the Pro Bono Clinic has won numerous awards from the New York State Bar, from a lot of different locations, a lot of different organizations have awarded the Pro Bono Clinic great honors. And I think I call them the darlings of Albany, because, you know, we're one of the committees that actually is in the public face, right? Most of our other committees are for attorneys and are internal, but the Pro Bono Clinic is a very public facing part of Albany, and we encourage you to either donate or donate your time. So thank you everyone for coming, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the fall conference, which is continuing tomorrow, starting at 9 a.m. and ending with the big lunchtime panel discussing anti-Asian hate and some of the information you heard about from the rise of anti-Asian hate PDF that was sent out to, I guess, all the membership. And you'll hear more about it from Chris Kwok and one of the co-chairs, Karen King, tomorrow at lunchtime. So thanks again, everybody. Have a good night.